All right, so first, I'd like to ask you about the show, November 7th with Capital J and Spins. This is at
it's a place called Round Venue in Toronto. I believe it's on Augustus Street in Kensington Village. Geez, it's only been 5 years since I left Toronto, and already I forget certain areas. That's how lame I am.
All right. Well, I'll make sure to get the proper information. I'll just select that. I'll throw the proper.
It's in Kensington. I know that for sure, and it's on Augustus Street, and it's called Round Venue.
Now, because I didn't go back and look at every time you ever spun, which would have been impossible, I'm curious. Have you ever spun with Capital J before?
I don't remember. If we did, it was many years ago. I think we once did do a show together in Philadelphia, but this is like 12, maybe 13 years ago. So it's hard to really remember all of the details. I think we did, but it's been a long time. But we're doing this little mini tour together. We thought it'd be fun for the fans, for him and me, to just go around and do a small handful of shows, mostly in Ontario, where it's both of us on either we're going to play on 4 turntables at some venues, or other venues we're just going to go back to back. And we've got the Toronto show together. We're also playing Guelph together. We're playing London together. And is there one more? I can't remember. But it's hard to keep track of all these shows. But it's going to be fun spinning with Jay, man. He's great.
Yeah, and the dates are available on freakyflow.com, correct?
Exactly. Yeah, there's a calendar section, and that just links to the calendar in my Facebook page, and that tells all the shows, not just the ones I'm doing with Jay, but also some additional shows. I'm doing one of my own in Ottawa, and for any U.S. listeners that may be streaming this from the radio station's website, I also have a show coming up in Seattle, and I think something in New Mexico, a couple other U.S. shows as well. So that's all there on freakyflow.com.
Awesome. I'll make sure to give a shout out to our New Mexico listeners. Make sure they hit up that show.
Definitely.
The next question I had, it was basically the mix that you just released. This was the 21st. So yeah, this was Tuesday. This just came out.
That's right.
Now this is volume 19 in the series. Tell me about the series.
Well, the series, it starts with Freaky Flow Volume 1, and that was released, I think, in 1995, so almost 20 years ago. And it was originally released as a cassette tape, an audio cassette tape. And, ever since then, I just started releasing new volumes of mixes, 2, 3, 4, and those were all on cassette. And I think I got to around volume 8 on cassette tape, and that probably came out around 99 or 2000 or something like that, maybe 2001. And then, after that came out, I started getting into mixed CDs with different labels. First was the Obscene Underground mix CD.
I remember that one.
Yeah, that has the word Tits on the cover. So I put the mixtape series on hold after Volume 8, because then I started doing CDs instead. So we did that. I did a couple of mixed CDs for a label out of Los Angeles called Moonshine Music. I did a Splashback CD. Anyway, long story short, after, now that we're in the age of very few people buying CDs and people want free music, I decided to give people free music. So I think maybe in 2012, I decided to pick up the Freaky Flow mix series again. And, I ended with Volume 8, and so I picked right up with Volume 9. And since then, every maybe 3 or 4 months, I release a new volume. So, continued with Volume 9, 10, 11, and now we're up to Volume 19, which was just released again as a free download, a free audio stream at freakyflow.com.
That's something that's just never going to stop, is it?
I have no plans to stop doing that. I like making these mixes. People like listening to them. I might as well keep going with it. Actually, this newest one, Freaky Flow Volume 19, that was just released, this one has, I believe, 6. It's got a bunch of tracks from other people, but it also has 6 tracks that I personally co-produced with other people as well. And those 6 tracks are being released in the next 2 months. So you can listen to them on my mix right now for free, or if you want the isolated tracks so you as a DJ can spin them out yourself, or just have the full track from start to finish, 4 of them are going to be sold on Beatport and probably iTunes, and then 2 of them we're giving away completely free tracks. So keep on the lookout for those.
Yeah, I definitely will. I will be looking for those, and we'll be dropping those on the show. I can be sure of that.
Those 6 tracks I was talking about, one of them is we're giving away for free, also on my SoundCloud within the next 2 weeks. And that's a track I did with the drum and bass producer Atlantic Connection, who just makes amazing stuff. So I think people will really like that one. That free track is called Prawn by Freaky Flow featuring Atlantic Connection, and that'll be up soon. And then 2 more tracks are coming out a couple weeks later for sale. And those are called, one is called What You Gonna Play, and that's by Freaky Flow and Tiger Spit. And then on the B side of that is, that track is called Send 'Em Home. And then about a month later, so getting into December, I've got another free track giveaway, and that one is called, that's actually a remix I did with a producer called Bank, great drum and bass producer called Bank, and that's just a remix we decided to do of the old drum and bass classic, The Dark Stranger. So we're giving that away for free on my SoundCloud or on freakyflow.com in early December. And then the following week, there's 2 more tracks that I did with Bank. So those are by Freaky Flow and Bank, and those ones are called, one is called Knee Deep, which I really like. It's sort of a half-speed drum and bass, like a half-speed thing that breaks into drum and bass in the middle. Nice. Sort of like a hip-hop kind of vibe to it. And then the other one we did is a track called Applause for Concern, which I think is a really fun track, and it's got a lot of crowd noise in it. So hopefully people will pick those tracks up and enjoy them. And in the meantime, if you just, like I said, if you just want to listen to them, all 6 of those are mixed into my Volume 19 mix that just dropped for free.
Wow, that's awesome. And then those free tracks are going to be out just in time for Christmas. It's going to be Freaky Flow Santa.
There you go. Santa Flow.
There you go. That's awesome. I'm definitely going to be looking out for those. The other question I was going to ask related to the mixtape series, going back to the origin of it, looking at the progression of the media all the way through, from analog straight through to digital, like obviously from CD, like cassette tape to CD was the analog to digital essentially. But then now not even a physical product in your hand, but something ethereal. It's on a computer, exists on the internet, which is some ethereal thing. Do you miss the old days where you actually had the cassette tape, like you played it 100 times, it actually got a little bit stretched in the one part, it had a little more personality to it?
I don't really miss that at all, myself, cause, I'm just thinking as a music fan in general. I used to buy cassettes and they really had sort of a lot of hiss to them, a lot of noise. It's not like vinyl. Like vinyl you can be, I think, legitimately nostalgic about because it's still a pretty clean sounding format, but audio cassettes were all hissy and you had a Dolby noise reduction and sometimes the tape would break and whatever. And the other thing I didn't like about it, which I'm able to do now, is, any of my mixes had to be only 45 minutes long because each side of a cassette is 45 minutes max on a 90-minute cassette. And
that was the longest, yeah.
Yeah, now you can make it however long you want. So most of my mixes nowadays are like an hour plus. So yeah, that's kind of fun. So I don't really miss that. And the other thing I don't miss is the inconvenience of taking, 20,000 songs with you. If you tried to do that on cassettes, you'd have to take suitcases with you of cassette tapes on your vacation. Now you just throw it all in a little iPod and you're good to go. So that I love.
Yeah, you ever get one of those aging hippie DJs kind of look at you funny and give you crap and tell you about the old days when he had to lug around all the vinyl, and now he's looking at us digital DJs walking around with a USB stick and just kind of angry and bitter.
Right. Well, see, the irony of that is that so when I listen to music, I love listening to it in a digital format if I'm driving or if I'm listening at home. But when I DJ, I still play all vinyl records. I don't play any digital format. And that's not because I'm nostalgic, and it's not because I'm one of these hippie guys that longs for the days of yesteryear. It's because I'm lazy, and I don't want to transfer all of my vinyl to a digital format, and I don't want to go out and learn Serato, and I don't want to I'm sure there's going to be a learning curve if I ever get into CDJs. I still use vinyl because all my music's already on vinyl. They still make lots of good new drum and bass on vinyl. And I'm just really, really used to it and comfortable with it. And it's not really, those aren't really good reasons to still spin vinyl, but those are my reasons anyway.
Well, you know what? It kind of points me to another question that kind of points to a difference, kind of an evolution of the DJ, let's say. Because I find there was more, maybe an art to it when you are a turntablist versus a digital DJ. It gets to the point where the software, the hardware, can make it so that a person seems like a genius by pressing play. Now, if that same person were put behind a pair of turntables, that's what separates the men from the boys in terms of DJs, I would think.
Well, there's some truth to that, but it's not, I will say it's not entirely true. As technology evolves in any medium, new skill sets are required to use it. So by that same token, some of these other guys that go out and just play an all digital format, and maybe they use some of the tricks that are in the software or in some of the hardware to really make the crowd hype, but maybe they're not doing traditional things the way I'm doing. Well, by that same token, I probably can't do what they're doing. You know what I mean? So you just said, what you just said was let's see get in front of a pair of turntables and see how they do. Well, by that same token, let's see me get on their software and see how I'll do. I have no idea how to use it. I'll bomb. So, and it's because they've developed a different skill set than I have. So there's that aspect to it. And the other aspect to it is there are some people that still use an all digital format, but they do it in a creative way or a way that's similar to turntables. I mean, for people that use Serato, for example, most of them are just using it to cue up music, and then they're still using those vinyl-like cue things that they throw on the turntables, and there's really no difference in the skill set, and really the same with CDJs. So I certainly don't look at any DJ playing a digital format and knock them for not doing what I'm doing. Some of them are really good at it, and some of them really rock the crowd and are really skilled. The only time I would ever look down on the DJ for using a different format than me would be if they sort of got up, pressed play, walked away for an hour, and that was their set. That's pretty lame, but as long as you're doing something interesting and new and creative and rocking the crowd, I don't care how you do it or what medium you use. It's about the skills, not about the technology.
True, and if the crowd's rocking, I mean, no one's questioning what's going on behind the decks there. I mean, basically, I was getting towards. I know with this Serato software, I am familiar with it, and there's a button on there. It's the evil. It's called sync, and it automatically beat matches for you.
Got it.
So that's the kind of shortcut, but it is a different skill set, isn't it? I mean, I've gone through the progression, and it is quite different. But especially with Final Scratch, now Scratch Tractor, they still have the time-coded vinyl, and you're right, it's exactly the same sound, exactly the same skill set.
Yeah. So, for that point, I just say, as long as you're doing something up there that requires some kind of skill, it doesn't have to be the exact skills that I know or the exact skills that somebody else knows, but as long as you're getting up there and doing something that's creative and requires some practice, I'm all for it, man. Do what you do and rock it how you rock it, for sure.
And the other aspect of the progression of the media is that there's a lot of doors that open too. I mean, you got all kinds of crazy you can do now with sampler pads, and I mean, it gets to the point where there's just all kinds of new toys for the DJs.
It's true, and that goes for even like these really skilled battle hip-hop turntablist DJs. There are things, so there's turntablists out there that just like do, that 20 years ago they did all kinds of crazy scratching, juggling tricks. And today there's still these guys out there, and a lot of them don't use vinyl, but they're still amazing because they're using the technology to advance what they would have been able to do without it. I'm thinking of one particular sort of turntablist battle guy who was amazing before when he was just using vinyl, and now he's still amazing using a digital format, but he's doing things that that just wouldn't have physically been possible without this new technology. And it still looks and sounds amazing and requires immense skill.
Yeah, and now it's just opening up new frontiers. Do you want to plug who that? Do you want to plug who that is in particular? Or?
Yeah, it's this guy named M-Rock. He's a hip hop DJ out of Toronto.
Oh, yeah. I'm not familiar with him, but I'm gonna have to check him out for sure.
Oh, he's dope, man, for sure.
Yeah. Why do you spell? Is it M-R-O-C-K or?
Yeah, it's like M like Mary hyphen rock.
Okay, that's exactly how I saw it.
Yeah.
Cool, man. I'm gonna have to definitely check that out.
For sure.
All right, now I want to get on to Ant Farm.
Yeah.
Because, like I said, this is was more the focus for me, and I got a jillion questions about it. Now, the first question that I'm going to ask you about Ant Farm, first I'm going to plug it. I'm going to say Ant Farm is a novel by Stephen Aaron Gray. It's a novel about what's bugging society. That's the subtitle. It's available on Amazon.com. You can look it up under that name. And I'm going to ask you, Mr. Flo, what is Ant Farm?
Yeah, the easiest way to get the book, yes, it's on Amazon, but the easiest way to get it is just go to my website, which is my book website, which is antfarmbook.com. That actually redirects to my author page, stephenaarongray.com, but antfarmbook.com is easier to remember, and if you go there, it has a purchase link for the book. But the most important thing is that it's got a downloadable PDF, a free downloadable PDF of the first 4 chapters completely for free. So if people are sort of hesitant, I don't know if I'm going to buy this new book by Freaky Flo, what does he know about writing? Well, just go download the first 4 chapters and then decide for yourself. And also, I know that a lot of my music fans don't love to read, so what I did for them was I put up the first 4 chapters as an audiobook where I'm narrating the book, so you don't have to flip through pages. You can just plug it in and listen. And for the audiobook chapters, I put that up at freakyflow.com also. You can download the first 4 audiobook chapters completely for free at freakyflow.com.
Wow, that's amazing. That's actually a brilliant maneuver, because I can't imagine anyone getting through 4 chapters and not having to continue. I mean, not in terms not wanting, needing to continue.
Oh, well, thank you, man. I certainly hope people will want to find out how the book ends, you know?
Oh, I don't even want to talk about it. I discussed it with you, and let's just say I won't ruin anything by saying that I'm very glad that there was an epilogue.
Okay, good. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Without giving much of a spoiler, it does, it almost ends in a really sad way, and in much the same, we can talk about this a little later, but one of the main inspirations for my book was George Orwell's Animal Farm, which I think will be pretty obvious to anybody that reads both. And I know that with his book, it definitely ends in a pretty hopeless sounding way. So to parallel his, I had mine also start to end in a pretty hopeless way, but then I added an epilogue that hopefully will provide some hope if the characters in the book have learned anything from their experiences.
And now, I have to say, and exactly like Animal Farms, it is, in so many ways, a metaphor for today, for today's society, for society in general.
Yeah, that's right. That was the intention of it. Animal Farm was a metaphor for what was happening in Orwell's world decades ago. But also it explored a different philosophy than what mine explores. His book was really about what state-sponsored communism can lead to, or does inevitably lead to. But he didn't go far enough. He seemed to still think that some kind of government can work. And I don't think so. I don't think that it can. And I wanted to take a similar structure to what he did and write a different story that espouses my philosophy, which shows that it doesn't matter if you're talking about communism or socialism or even a democracy or a republic. No matter how you slice it, people that get into power are always going to wield that power to their advantage, and things are going to get really bad. So that's how my philosophy is pretty dramatically different from his.
quite true. And actually, I got a question later on about the white cockroaches and the poker games that kind of point specifically to that corruption of people through power.
Yeah.
I was going to ask, now there's a few different areas I'm going to ask this question about. How do you see this applying to today's world, meaning Ant Farm, of course? But, I mean, there's a lot of things that you delve into. You talk about healthcare. You talk about education. You talk about nationalization of things and how that can lead to overregulation. I kind of want to open this question up for you. I don't want to kind of narrow it down by pointing you down specific roads.
Yeah, no, that's okay.
It definitely applies. It tries to apply that philosophy that you discussed to what ails us now, because the characters in the book progress in a way that seems to mirror what society has done in the past and leading to today. So maybe we can start by going over some of the problems that the book discusses. I mean, you feel free to go into the areas that you'd like to discuss, but I mean, there's so many. I want to leave it open to you.
Absolutely. Well, I'll say this. A couple, you brought up a few of the issues. You mentioned healthcare. I think you mentioned nationalization of certain services, that kind of thing. In total, there's like 40 or 50 different things that I discussed. And it's only a 200-page book, so that means I didn't have a lot of time to really dive too deep into any of these issues. And I didn't want to. It's a novel. It's supposed to be a little bit fun. It's not supposed to be really information-heavy. It's not based on any, it's not literally based on any real-world statistics. But it is inspired by real-world situations. And so a couple of people have said, well, why didn't you just focus on one or two or maybe three issues? Because then you would have been able to get more in depth with each of those issues. But my response to that is always, I didn't want to get in depth with any of these issues. Rather, I wanted to show 40 or 50 different issues all lined up side by side in a really sort of surface level exploration of them. Because when you see them all side by side, you start to notice patterns, right? If I only show two or three, it's hard to pick up on any patterns. But when you look at 50 and you don't get too in depth into any of them, you do start to notice patterns. And my hope was that the takeaway for people would be that you realize that when the state tries to control one of them or three of them or 50 of them, the results are always the same. When the state really tries to get involved in healthcare, it makes healthcare worse. When they try to get involved in welfare, they make welfare worse. When they try and get involved in currency or unemployment or gun control or protection or unions or the postal service or the judicial system, they make all of these things really bad after time. And people wonder, well, how could these things work without a government controlling them? And my book really tries to answer those questions. My book tries to show how crime is dealt with in a free society, how, a so-called national defense would be dealt with, how charity is dealt with, how poverty is dealt with, how drugs are dealt with, wage laws. It tries to show how all of these things can be dealt with in a free society absent of the state telling people you have to do this or you go to jail. And then once it explores how these things could be done in a free society, then we start to see in my book, in Ant Farm, we start to see the government getting involved and how all of those things just get worse and worse and worse and worse and worse, even though the people that have handed them over to government, they don't mean for them to get worse. Their intentions are good. And so my book really tries to explore those things.
I think that's essentially characterized by the Constitution, the set of laws that they decide upon, that they post up. And initially, it's very simple and it's very few. And I can't remember what number it gets up to towards the end of the book, but it was in the hundreds that the rules, and that kind of is indicative of the government intrusion, the regulation, the way that they insinuate and insert themselves into the lives of everybody.
Oh yeah, I mean in the real world today, I'm not sure about Canada, but I do know in the U.S. and I'm sure it's not that different in Canada. Maybe it's even more. But certainly in the U.S., even if you were to do nothing, even if you somehow could live without eating or sleeping, and you lived to be 100 years old, and all you did for every second of every day was read the laws that apply to you, you wouldn't finish them before you died. That's how many laws there are.
And you're responsible for knowing each and every one.
You're supposed to be, even though it's just physically impossible to do that. You know, you always hear people, these law and order types saying, ignorance of the law is no excuse. And any rational answer to that is, it's physically impossible to know every law and to be able to eat and sleep at the same time. You can't.
Yep, and I think we're in excess of the hundreds when it comes to the laws and regulations that we have in any quote unquote free society right now.
Oh, in excess of hundreds? No, it's tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, if not millions, because every subsector of anything has a whole new set of codes, a whole new set of laws. You want to open a food business? Here's another 10,000 regulations that you need to know about. Oh, you want to open a retail store? Here's a different set of 10,000 regulations you need to know about. And of course, people proceed and they make it through and without knowing all these laws. But, you know, here's another funny thing. The average person unknowingly commits 3 felonies per day. So if the state wanted to get anybody in trouble, they got their justification right there. We all commit crimes every day without even knowing it.
That's an amazing statistic.
Yeah. Here's a really easy one. If you have any expired prescriptions, I'm not sure about Canadian law, but it's like I said, it's probably quite similar. But if you or anybody has, like, you know, if you got a prescription because you had a strep throat or something, and you got the penicillin or whatever, and you just never threw it away after you got better, if that's in your medicine cabinet, and you were ever raided by the police for some other reason, and they found that, well, you're under arrest.
Possession of a controlled substance.
Right.
Yeah, because it's not. Yeah, I can see how it's a manipulation, to be sure, an exertion of power, but that law there exists to be, you know, utilized at the discretion of who's using it. So
right.
that leads to the exercise of authority being corrupted, right?
I mean, there's a great proverb out there, and I'm probably going to mangle it, but paraphrasing it is something like this. It's the more laws you make, the more criminals you create.
I'll counter with I can't remember who to attribute it to, but power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good one too.
Sure.
Yeah.
And that's now some of the themes that I see coming out of this book, again, without speaking too much in specific terms and giving anything away. It seemed to speak, especially in the way the Ant Farm Society was set up initially, it seemed to speak in favor of more of a common law approach. Is that what you were aiming for? Basically, if you're not harming somebody else with your actions, you're committing no crimes.
Yeah, I mean, that really is the theme of the philosophy of liberty. Some people call it libertarianism. I don't really like to use that word because it means so many different things to so many different people. The theme definitely, though, is you should be allowed to do what you want as long as you're not harming other people or their property.
And I know I've seen, you see as like an anecdote in books, I know I've seen it in a couple of the trivia type books. They go through once in a while to talk about some of the ridiculous and insane laws, like, you know, for example, in Pennsylvania, you can't put a bucket on your horse on a Wednesday. And I think those types of things, we take it out of context and we see how hilariously absurd it is. Mm-hmm. But it still fails the test of self-examination because we still put it to the other. We're not really applying it to ourselves and looking at it and saying, this is what we're doing to ourselves. And essentially, at the end of the book, there was you had the let's call it the politicians, essentially a vested class of bourgeoisie, but you had the ants in the field who were suffering, and I believe in the one passage where the ant's looking up it, but he doesn't even realize. It's almost like he doesn't realize his own bondage.
Well, that's exactly it. What are the best kind of slaves? It's the ones that don't even know they're slaves, right? So yeah, obviously, in many ways, all of us today are literally slaves. Now, I know that word slave comes with a lot of baggage. I don't mean chattel slavery. I don't mean being in chains and having to bale cotton like they did to people from Africa. That's a far worse form of slavery, obviously. But if you take the word slavery and you define it as your labor is owned by somebody else, then yes, we are all slaves, because in this country, Canada, and also in the U.S., part of your labor, up to 50, sometimes 60% of your labor, is owned by the state, even without your permission. And what I mean by that is taxation. Whatever you earn, the state takes it from you without your permission. Therefore, all the work you're doing is owned by them.
And then what meager take you do take home when you go to purchase items, then another percentage is taken off.
Well, that's right. Every step of the way, there's this middleman, taxman, government man putting his dirty little hands and taking it. If you run any kind of business where you manufacture stuff and you buy your raw supplies, well, that's taxed. And then you take your raw supplies and you turn them into a product, and that's taxed. And then you take that product and you send it to your distributor, and that's taxed. And then your distributor takes it. Yeah, every step of the way, the taxman's getting something, and they claim they're doing it because they need that money to provide you with a service, with protection, with regulation, with laws, with streets, with all these things that the government provides. But I personally think that without the government forcibly taking it from people would figure out ways to provide all of those things in other ways at a fraction of the cost, at twice, 3 times, 10 times the efficiency and effectiveness.
And the quality, yeah, exactly. And you go through that, and like you say, you tackle a lot of problems and touch on them, but it really points to the solutions, because you see, even like you're discussing just now, people will find those solutions in the novel. When a road needed to be built between this area and this area, the people who needed that road built found a way to get it done. They didn't need somebody in some other place to decide to send a company to go build the road. They needed the road built. They did it.
Right. That's sort of in libertarian circles, that's sort of an inside joke. People always say, when you're talking about a free society, the response is always, but who will build the roads? As if people in a free society wouldn't want roads and wouldn't know how to build roads. It's laying down concrete. It's not that complicated. People. What's that?
Sorry, I was going to say maybe government owns the recipe.
Right, exactly. They've got the special road recipe. Actually, no, here's the other thing. I know you're just kidding around, but there's some interesting true statistics around this, that government actually builds more inefficient roads than non-government companies. Like if you ever go to Disney World, they've got their own little sort of Disney city, and they build their roads just fine, and they I'm pretty sure they fall apart less often because they're using more expensive materials, because they care about the longevity. The state doesn't care about the longevity. They've got an unlimited budget, and they just keep taxing you and taking more money anytime it needs repairs.
Yeah, it speaks to the complacency that sets in, both in society and in the novel. It's more and more taken for granted that all they'll do is raise the tax rate, get more money, and then they'll be able to provide the services. But demonstrably, the quality, even the quantity of the services diminishes. It gets bloated. There's way more money going in, but only a certain amount is coming out.
Yeah, and it happens so slowly with time that most people don't really notice. And the other thing is the cause for this, right? I mean, I'm painting this picture of a free society and people building roads and attacking poverty and figuring out protection in a really rosy way. But the truth is that even in a free society, it's not going to be perfect. There's no such thing as a utopia. There's still going to be problems. And so that's sort of how we came to be, and I explore this in Ant Farm in my book, that even in their free society that they start off with at the beginning, there are some murders, there are some accidental deaths, there are some poor people that aren't cared for. And so most people, their gut instinct is to say, oh my gosh, there's some suffering in the world, let's figure out a way to fix it. And it's admirable to want to fix it. But then what they'll usually go out and do is they'll get the government to come in and try to fix it. And they don't realize that even though there's problems, when you get the government involved, it makes those problems worse. So now you've got more crime and more poverty and more inequality. So I think that's the problem is that there's no solution for complete and total utopia. The only solution you can try to do is to minimize the suffering and maximize prosperity, but you're never going to completely eliminate or maximize those things respectively. And people have this yearning to do that. And because of that yearning, they implement all these terrible things that are well-intentioned and make all the problems actually worse.
Whether or not by intention. Yeah, exactly. One of the themes that describes the descent of the society, I think, or that I saw, and is exactly a parallel to what goes on in today's society and leads to the slavery you talked about. The slavery that I like to describe it as is debt slavery, because it's slavery through money. Now, I'd like you to talk about maybe, because we did, and I got a follow-up to this one. In the statistics provided at the beginning of each chapter, and in some of the specifics described with the characters, especially when you talk about the gold a little bit later on, it talks about the difference between inflation and real income. People's wages, even though they are going up, and you take great care to show that the incomes are still going up, but the inflation, the cost of living, goes up so much more drastically in relation to it that it creates this grinding poverty. So that all the numbers are going up, but in relation, real income versus inflation is just way off.
Right. Well, I think to understand this, you have to understand what inflation actually is. And I try to explain this in a really simple way in my book that even if you've never studied economics or politics or philosophy, frankly, even if you're like a high school student, I think this will make sense to you. And I think even if you're older and you do understand this stuff, it'll still be interesting and entertaining to you. Inflation isn't that things get more expensive. That's a symptom of inflation. What inflation is an increase in the money supply. And in today's day and age, the only people increasing the money supply are governments. They print more money. And before governments controlled currencies, non-government people used to issue their own currencies. And the most effective ones were based on precious metals, on gold, because gold, there's a finite amount of gold in the world. Most of it has been mined, not all of it, but most of it. And so you can't just create new gold out of thin air the way you can create new paper out of, not thin air, but certainly out of trees, right? And, and gold has other valuable properties besides just being a means of exchange. It's also valuable for electronics and other things that metals are used for because of its heat and melting properties and that kind of thing. So it's valuable on its own because people need gold for other things. And because of that, it becomes a great means of exchange because it doesn't expire, it doesn't go bad. And so as soon as governments take over running currencies, they can just keep printing more money. And because they print more money, that's really an insidious way of stealing your money, because if you've got $100 today, and then in 10 years, the government just prints more and more and more and more money, it makes your $100 worth less and less and less. You'll be able to buy fewer things with that $100 in 10 years.
So even if you make more money, that your money has become less valuable by a much greater degree.
Exactly right. I liken it, one of the easiest ways to understand it is I always think back to like when I used to collect baseball and hockey cards. And I remember this would be revealing my age a little, but I remember I had like the Eric Lindros rookie card, and it was worth so much money in the Beckett card manual, whatever. And one of the reasons it was worth so much is because a fixed amount of them were printed. But if Topps or whatever, Upper Deck, I can't remember what company it was, if they just out of the blue printed more and they were all identical to the one I had, mine would be worth less than it was, because when there's more supply of anything, the value of that thing becomes worth less and less and less. And this is how governments create sort of an infinite amount of money for themselves to spend.
And now that is, and it tends to lead to a bloated bureaucracy, overspending. And now this is another theme I picked up in the book that I was going to get to next, which fits in perfectly. There seems to be a loss in that process of transitioning services that you want to get done to government, that there seems to be a complete disconnect with what is assumed to be their priority, their mission. And by that I would say, I'll call it the public good. Mm-hmm. And it tends to get to the point where it's pointed more to a profit-oriented system, but not even just profit, but more in terms of feeding that bureaucratic monster and bloating it, rather than, and you did this in the book where you saw that the charity, for example, at first gave away most of its money, but then at the end it was giving away the portion that it was taking at the beginning. I think it was 90% and 10%. At first it would give away 90% of its money, but then by the end it was only giving away 10% because the 90% was needed to support the bureaucracy. Is that this bureaucracy versus the public good? This is right. Something I think is very well expressed in the book.
Well, yeah, that's well, thank you. And that's actually a real-world example based on real-world stats, where if you look at non-government charities like United Way and Covenant House and Red Cross and those kinds of things that are not controlled by any state, those tend to give away 89% of their money, and they keep 10 to 20% as operating expenses and to pay their staff and that kind of thing. But then conversely, if you look at like Canada welfare or the United States welfare, it's the opposite. They, they'll collect all this money from the taxpayer, and 80 to 90% of that is used on their overhead, and only 10 to 20% is used to give to people in need. And I can't think of a more inefficient way of doing things than that. I mean, that really says it all. And the point there, and I try to really point this out in my book through numerous examples, is that when there's a free market for something, when it's not state-controlled, that means there can be competition because there's nobody there to ban competition, right? If you want to open a sandwich shop and I want to open a sandwich shop and Jimmy and Billy all want to open sandwich shops, we're all allowed to. So we all open our sandwich shops, right? And we're in search of profit. That's the other thing. A lot of people think profit is a really dirty word. Like, oh, profit, you should be out for profit. You should be out to help people. Well, the truth is that for any of our sandwich shops to turn the most amount of profit, we have to please the customer. We have to offer great service and great product and make the customer happy. To me, that's the real public good, is how much can we please this customer? Because if I can't please the customer as well as you can, if my sandwiches are too expensive, or if I'm too greedy, or if I cut corners and my sandwiches aren't as good and my prices aren't as good, they're going to go to your sandwich shop because yours are better, and then you're going to reap those profits and I'm not. But let's say that the government stepped in and they said, okay, you're doing the best sandwich shop, therefore we're going to ban every other sandwich shop, and we're going to take over your sandwich shop, and we're going to run all sandwich shops. Well, now there's only one company running sandwich shops. There's no competition at all, and they have a monopoly. They're the only game in town for sandwiches. And what's going to happen, and what does happen, is that all of a sudden, You don't care anymore about pleasing your customer. Why? Because they've got nowhere else to go. They can't go to a competitor. You're the only game in town. If anybody wants a sandwich, they have to come to you. And so now you can start charging whatever you want. Now you can start using just whack ingredients that make people sick. And who cares? And, you know, you'll start having long lines and there'll be terrible customer service. And if you want to speak to a manager, they won't care because where are you going to go? Who's the competition? Yeah. And it sounds so crazy, but that's what we have with the post office. That's what we have with the police. That's what we have with the justice system. They're the only company that does it. And because of that, you know, you've been to a post office, I'm sure. Most of them are terrible. Most of them just don't care at all. And it's because...
Have you ever tried to renew your license?
Oh, the DMV, there you go. They're the only company. It's the state-run DMV, and you're waiting forever, and you're paying ridiculous fees that you don't know what they go to. And it's because, okay, you don't like our service? Go somewhere else. Oh, what? There is nowhere else? Too bad. Right?
Yeah, back of the line.
Exactly. And so that's what happens when you have a monopoly. And the only true monopolies that ever arise are the ones that government instills. Because any other so-called monopoly, if there's no ban on the competition, then you and I could start a competitor tomorrow. And it's no longer a monopoly. The only true monopoly is when the state says, sorry, Freaky Flo, you're not allowed to start a sandwich shop or you'll go to jail.
Yep. And even those things that people think that the government is there for to make sure that doesn't happen. Let's say we open the sandwich shops, but I don't refrigerate my meat and it's rancid and people get sick. People think, well, that's why you have regulatory agencies. That's why you have certification regulation. You know what, though? If I served rancid sandwiches, I wouldn't be in business very long. Now, some people may get sick, and that's not a very good thing. And I should probably be prosecuted if it was due to a lack of diligence. But at the same time, that free market, people can decide that. They don't need someone to tell them where to go. People will know. It's almost like an economic principle of sorting itself, the free market sorting itself out.
Yeah, the economic principle, the textbook term for it is called the invisible hand, right? It means that you don't need somebody there sort of micromanaging everything. You don't need somebody coming in and saying, okay, that place sells rancid meat, let's shut it down. That place doesn't, let's boost them up. Because there's this invisible hand of the market where somehow things will work themselves out. And that somehow is really not an esoteric or nebulous thing. What it is that, one person gets sick, word spreads, and nobody wants to go there anymore. I mean, this is especially becoming more and more true with all these great services like Yelp and with customer review services like Uber and Airbnb. You get to see what other people think of them, and the best rise to the top and the crappiest ones fall to the bottom, and people don't want to use them anymore.
3 quick questions here that I'm going to throw at you. We'll try to answer them fast and get through them in 10 minutes. The one thing that the end of the book points to, and I think this is pointing towards more of a point towards a solution. It points towards these two, like it basically is a metaphor for the two political parties with the obvious coloring and symbolism of the red and the blue.
Yes.
But it shows that eventually the lie of both, the fact that it's two faces of the same coin.
Exactly. Yeah. And even though there are more political parties in Canada than there are in the U.S., you've got the all want to control different areas of your life. And it doesn't matter what kinds of controls they're talking about, unless there's a political party out there talking about, hey, we want to get out of your lives and let you do what you want. We don't want to control anything. Unless there's somebody doing that, I'm not interested. But that's not really how you win votes. You usually win votes because people want to hear, hey, I'm going to take care of you. And that's what all the political parties try to do in different ways. They try and say, okay, there's a problem here, we'll make a law about it, and that will fix it. Oh, there's a problem there, we'll make a law about it, and that will fix it. Without realizing that the problem was probably created in the first place by the government, and that when they do try to solve that problem with laws, it will almost always make things worse, you know? And so, to me, I'm completely jaded by the whole political system anywhere. Voting, I think, accomplishes almost nothing, especially in bigger elections. And even if you do get the guy in there that you want, that person is going to take away your freedom. I think that's really the only that's the only constant, reliable thing about a politician is you can always count on them to further restrict your freedom of time.
Yeah, that's basically different philosophies politically, yet they have to follow through the same paradigm, and they ultimately have the same objective.
They do, just in different areas, right? So like, liberal or progressive politicians, they'll tell you that, okay, we want to let you have freedom in the social sphere. We want to let, if you're gay, you should be allowed to get married. And of course, it's a great thing. But then they come back and they tell you, but we want to control your money and how we spend it, and we want to give more to charity, like you're too stupid to give to charity on your own. Or to know which one. And then if you're looking at conservative politicians, they'll usually come in and say, okay, look, we think you know how to spend your money. We'll try and let you keep as much of it as possible. But we're not going to let you do any drugs. We're not going to let you gamble because we know what's best for you. So they all want to take away some aspect of your freedom. And I'd love to hear a politician say, hey, we'll just let you do what you want as long as you're not hurting anybody. But I haven't really found too many of those politicians yet, and any of the ones I have found don't really make it anywhere in politics.
Exactly. Now, the second question I had, and this is probably going to be the quick one, the white cockroaches in the book.
Yes.
Seem to be symbolic. Now, is that symbolic of what America left when they left colonial rule in Britain and founded America in the 18th century?
You know, I didn't design it specifically with that in mind. I designed it as one possibility. It's really a metaphor for any empire and any of its people sort of rebelling or breaking away from that empire to start a new society. So certainly parallels can be made between the U.S. and in Canada, but it really applies to lots of other places in the world too. And also, a lot of people think that I made the cockroaches white to represent like the white man, the white oppressor. And I didn't really do that with that in mind. Rather, there's sort of a surprise at the end that you alluded to earlier, where it just wouldn't have worked if the cockroaches were green. They had to be white so that this sort of surprise could play out.
True that. Which actually leads me to the last question, which I'm not going to throw out a spoiler alert. I'm not going to spoil it, but I want to talk about the end, and we might have to edit this out if we say too much. So you let me know.
Sure.
But I have a specific question, and this is in the epilogue, so it doesn't really. It's the most central part of the book as far as I'm concerned, but it's not central to the way the story plays out.
Sure.
The card game at the end.
Yeah.
Is that in itself literally and figuratively a window, because the ants were looking in, literally and figuratively a window into the collapse of oligarchy?
I don't know. I guess it depends what you mean on that. Maybe you could elaborate.
It seems like it was basically that the den of thieves was collapsing in amongst itself in front of the ants that were realizing that these are the people who are running things, but they're and like you alluded to, the symbolism of the color starts to blend, and now all of a sudden these are just all the same scumbags.
Right. So, no, I don't, to answer your question, no, I don't think it signifies their collapse. That was really more to show that they break their own rules, right? So they banned gambling, and yet here they are gambling. They've banned card playing, and yet here they are card playing. And, as soon as, I know we see them in a fight over it, but politicians fight all the time in real life, and then they make up, and then they band together, and they form these bipartisan commissions where they take away your freedom. So I think that would probably happen in the book too. They'll have their little fight, and then they'll make up, and then everything's back to normal, and they're all in agreement again on how to take your freedom. Or maybe they differ on how to take your freedom, but they all agree that we should take your freedom. And the other part about that is that that's really almost a direct parallel for what happens in Animal Farm. And that was also intentional. I wanted to show that whether you're talking about, it doesn't matter what kind of political system you're talking about, whether you're talking about the socialist so-called paradise that the animals try to set up in Animal Farm, or you're talking about the democracy that the ants try and set up in my book, Ant Farm, things are going to end the same, and they're going to end badly.
And if the book had continued, if there was another chapter, things were on their way to getting much worse.
Oh, absolutely. And without giving too much away, because there is sort of, there's some parting words that are a little more hopeful, but there's ways that these things can be avoided. There are lessons that can be learned, and there's actions that we can take if we learn the lessons of history and don't repeat them.
Exactly true, sir. I want to thank you so much for doing this interview. Never mind that you're an amazing artist. The fact that you're putting something out there that not only you're not writing a children's book just to be able to go to your buddies and say, hey, I wrote a book, I'm an author. You wrote a very serious work here, and I wanted to commend you for it and thank you for it, because artists, in general, when they were much more influential in society, used to be the conscience of society. Now, that, I think, was lost when musicians in particular, let's say, started to see dollar signs more than they started to have the luxury to look at the society around them and critique it, and to be the voice of the people. And I think you're gaining a little bit of that credibility for artists in general back by doing this.
Oh, well, thank you. Listen, I think there's no shortage of musicians or actors that do have social causes that they adopt and that they advocate for. I just think that usually those social causes are bad.
Seem to be self-serving sometimes.
Sometimes they're self-serving, but sometimes they're not. Sometimes you see a lot of people really that are out there to want to fight poverty, or they're even in a free society, which we certainly don't have now, but even if we did, there would still be problems. And I think there are people that would want to solve those problems. But there's right ways to try and solve them, and then there's other ways to try and solve them that make them worse. And in advance, it's hard to know always what's gonna work and what's gonna make it worse, especially if you don't know much about historically how these things have played out. I've studied it, and I know that historically when governments become involved, they make problems worse. But it sounds counterintuitive. We grow up our whole lives thinking, if there's a problem, government can fix it. A lot of people think that, and so therefore a lot of musicians or actors or other celebrities will continue with that thought pattern, and they'll think, look, there's poverty, it's a terrible thing, and of course I agree. And then they'll go and say, we need the state to come and legislate and take more money to solve this problem. And they mean well, but they don't know that it's going to make it worse.
Right, the intention is there, but they don't see that in the application. And
exactly.
In that paradigm, it just doesn't fit. It doesn't address the problem, and the goodwill is there.
Yeah, and that's really my hope. That's really my hope with the book, with people reading Ant Farm. I know there are many well-intentioned people out there, and it's just, it depends in what direction you're going to drive your good intention. And I hope that after reading this book, some people that think differently beforehand will, after reading it, at least consider that maybe they should redirect the direction of their efforts in helping people to a way that will actually help people. And my book alone may not do it because, again, my book is fictional. I made it all up. But I hope that people will at least look into these things because there are other books and other sources out there that really do prove the points that I'm making in my book.